Thank you so much for coming on today. I am very, very excited because, as you know, we have not had somebody on to talk about long haulers yet or vaccine injuries. So I'm really excited to pick your brain.
Thanks, Katie. I'm excited too.
So, first of all, can we just start with the basics for obviously if people suspect or have been diagnosed as, struggling with long hauler syndrome, like they know that this episode is for them, but can we talk about some of the symptomology that they might be looking for or things that they might want to talk to their practitioners about or find and seek out someone like you to kind of work with on their health?
Yeah, most times when people are finally seeking me out, it's it's great to be proactive.
Mhm.
I think the newer strains of COVID that are going around, I think a lot of people have this false sense of security that, it's kind of like Omicron was and
Mhm.
it's not going to cause any issues. And we do have some indicators now that some of the things that kind of can predict that you might have a tougher time with COVID are like not the normal things that we used to hear about.
Yeah.
One of the biggest ones is like if you have a headache during COVID, your
Hmm.
chances of having long COVID are actually worse. And it's not necessarily like the severity of the disease, it's more just some underlying factors that we might not even have a clue about. So I guess my suggestion is just to be proactive and have the things on hand before you're in a panic, which is what most people do. They're in a panic and
Yeah.
trying to get a hold of someone to give them ivermectin or something, and that it's a process. It's not that easy, as you know.
Yeah.
So
A little too late.
yeah,
I think that with really honestly any viral infection and things, people are never prepared until it's kind of too late for them to be effective in minimizing or
yeah.
reducing severity, symptoms, onset, any of it. So I definitely want to pick your brain later on about what those things might be, besides obviously ivermectin. So other risk factors that people that have changed too that might kind of surprise people.
Yeah, just any sort of immune shifts. If you have an autoimmune disease
Hmm.
already, the immune system is kind of under attack, and it's whether it's from, an acute case of COVID or a past COVID that has resulted in some lingering symptoms, or even just post-vaccine symptoms that change how your immune system reacts to what's going on out there now. And again, like I know one of the things we'll be talking about is like reactivation of old viruses, and that is huge,
Yeah.
especially like Epstein-Barr.
Yeah, we can jump right there and kind of circle back because while we're on the topic, are you seeing? I imagine a lot of autoimmunity flares, people in remission. I definitely want to pick your brain about I don't work closely with either population, but I'm hearing a lot of Lyme flares and co-infections
Yeah.
with people, or Lyme really triggering a lot of other viruses at this point. So what are you, especially because you're in New York, like what are you seeing with all of that with your clients?
All over the place. Lots of a lot of the underlying issues that people are bringing to light are seeming like they are related to a reactivation of Epstein-Barr in the body. And there's a lot of theories. I've gone to some of the FLCCC conferences, and there's quite a few clinicians that are Lyme literate that are now calling themselves COVID literate because they kind of go hand in hand so much. Where
Yeah.
we know there's biofilms, we know there's underlying viral load that's maybe been, not doing
Mm.
anything. And then you reactivate that immune system because remember the immune system is now triggered so much more often because the spike protein is what we targeted for COVID, and it goes everywhere. We thought originally it stayed in the arm. It doesn't stay in the arm. So it's
Mhm.
going everywhere, and it's just, poking all the other viruses and saying, "Hey, wake
Yeah.
up. We need to
Yeah.
fight
Waken the
against
beast.
this." Exactly. And so that's been a huge trigger, and it seems like a lot of people seem to think even a lot of the Lyme issues are more related to Epstein-Barr reactivation, and those people do tend to have much more lingering symptoms. So,
Yeah, there's a new, I am only familiar because actually a colleague of both of ours informed me about the test for a shared client that we have, but there's a new test from IGeneX that can sort of, and correct me if I'm misspeaking about this, differentiate the possibility of vaccine injury or long haulers and Lyme and or co-infections being more of the driver of the issue. Is that sort of correct? I forget the
Um,
name of the test off the top of my head because I don't
Yeah,
remember it.
I'm not sure about IGeneX. I know that Quest has a test, and according to the experts from the conference I went to, like I actually had a patient that did that test, and their number came back like it was a little out of range. Like I forgot what the range was, but I think their number was like in the 2000s, and apparently they're not they're not looking at that as high risk for it being like a serious long COVID or vaccine injury until you're more like in the 20,000 range. So it's
Okay.
sort of like antibodies with,
Yeah.
you know, like, yeah, do you have an autoimmune thing when these antibodies come back, like even for thyroid?
Hmm.
Yeah, but like we can see them trend down if the
Yeah.
situation's improving. So it's kind of like that is what
Yeah.
I understand. But also one of the things they kept mentioning was sometimes, and just like a lot of things in functional medicine, sometimes the tests don't correlate with
Yeah.
what's happening in the person at all. So some of these people are walking around with these really high antibodies and they're perfectly fine. And then other
Hmm.
people, they're not so high and they're having horrible symptoms. And
Yeah.
it's so new that it's hard to know. So.
Are there other tests that you use or other individuals that are specializing in this are using to identify long hauler or vaccine injury in their patient? Or is it more read the patient, read the story, and kind of work alongside them?
Yeah, I mean, until more stuff comes out on those tests and what the accuracy is, and then also because I'm in New York and I'm a
Yeah,
pharmacist,
there's
it's a lot harder
so
anyway.
many.
So, I think so much of what I've learned is, being a part of these groups. A lot of these doctors that started these groups were traditional guys, and now what's happening is they're turning sort of toward functional medicine without even calling it functional medicine
Hmm.
because so much goes back to all the same stuff that we learned from day one of IFM, how
Yeah.
healthy is the gut, how healthy is the immune
Yeah.
system. And so, I look at the same thing. Like I tell, because I can't order blood work, I tell, my patients, like, let's get a CRP. If you've got high inflammation, your chances are worse of not handling this. Ferritin levels,
Hmm.
all the platelet count, all the usual suspects are pretty much go along with what we look at. And then, if they, a lot of those tests are out of pocket anyway. So I
Hmm.
don't know about you, but I have a lot of patients that just, they'd rather start treating and spending money there than spending a ton of money on all the testing. So
Yeah. Especially if the testing isn't quite matching up with where we need it to
exactly.
be right now. So if I were a client and I was coming to you, where would be some of the maybe questions or starting places that you would look at if I was kind of screaming long hauler syndrome? Where would you start? Would it be nutrition? Would it be supplementation? What?
Yeah, I mean, one of the best interventions always is, believe it or not, just intermittent fasting of
Mm,
some sort,
yeah.
because eating in that 8-hour window promotes the autophagy, mitophagy that help these people to, detox some of the crap that
Hmm.
needs to get out. If they're constantly eating, they're never going to clear any of that. So that's probably one of the biggest interventions that we can make, like from an easy, no
Hmm.
cost, no cost. Yeah. And then from there, it's just all the usual supplements. What's your vitamin D level at? That's
Yeah.
a huge one. I mean, according to studies, nobody that had a vitamin D level over 30 ended up in the hospital with COVID. Like that's not even
Mm.
that high. So if I see somebody that is
Hmm.
struggling with symptoms of long COVID, I want at least a 60 for their D level, more towards probably 80. Even if I see it up toward 100, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
So, vitamin D is important.
Mm.
Just the simple lifestyle things, getting outside, even if it's freezing out, go out there. whether
Yeah.
you do grounding or not with bare
Yeah.
feet, like I did
Mm-hmm.
this morning, is up to you, but it definitely, just helps with
Yeah.
your hormones, your melatonin, all that stuff. So, and melatonin is one too that has a lot of antiviral properties as well. So I usually make sure people are taking it or at least doing all the circadian rhythm
Yeah.
lifestyle things to, block the blue light and
Yeah.
use the red light glasses at night or red light therapy.
Yeah.
All those things are really beneficial as well. So many things.
Yeah. All the almost foundational pieces that like aren't sexy that we really should
So
all be
true.
doing. And it really especially when you don't feel well and you're struggling with this, like it's so hard to get yourself motivated sometimes to do all those simple quote unquote things that really make a big difference when immune function is
Yep.
completely out of whack. So talking about supplements, what are some of none of this is, of course, recommendations, guys. Talk to your practitioners, but that you like to see people, whether it's have on hand, for onset of really any viral infection, but especially with COVID, like what do you like to have in your arsenal or your clients' arsenals for,
Yeah. So,
that
I
coming?
mean, obviously vitamin D with K.
Mm-hmm.
I usually, I won't name any brands, but I like combinations that have A, D, E, and K in there
Mm-hmm.
in therapeutic amounts too, not just a little smidge. And then, when I have somebody that is sick, I up that vitamin D to sometimes 50,000 units
Yeah.
if the number's
Mm-hmm.
really low, sometimes 100,000 if they're really low, for like 5-day course just while
Yeah.
they're sick,
Mm-hmm.
and then go back down to maybe 5 or 10.
Yeah.
Um, and then, vitamin K, jury's out on how much, but I would say at least 300 micrograms of the K2, um, just to make sure that that's getting absorbed. And then I forgot what the number is, but higher A, and I use the Annatto E. I'm a little leery of some of the E's out there, so
Yeah.
I just stick with the Annatto E, and make sure that you have, and then a big key piece is hydration, making sure
Yeah.
you're getting your minerals because so many of my patients, I don't know if you have this issue, but they're all on board with drinking so much water in a day, but then they don't
Mm-hmm.
put anything in it, and I'm
Yeah.
like,
Mm-hmm.
you're actually diluting your electrolytes further if you
Yep.
do too much. So I make sure, I mean, most of my patients, I tell them to start with the morning with that Himalayan or Celtic sea salt or something in their water and squeeze a lemon or a lime in there and just
Mm-hmm.
start your adrenals on the right, get a good start to your day, and maybe you'll get a little bit more energy instead of just first thing going for the coffee. So
Yeah.
yeah, something as simple as that.
Yep.
So
Hydrating, but
those
hydrating right.
Exactly. And then, if I sense there's a lot of inflammation, some of the omegas, I love the SPMs. I know they're a lot more expensive,
Mm-hmm.
but they're really good. Turmeric products are great as long as you're using something quality that's
Yeah.
actually getting absorbed and doing you some good. Um, and then always magnesium. Like you said, it's all the basics.
Yeah.
Making sure you're using the right form of magnesium. That's always an education topic that,
Yep.
we have to make sure they're getting something, especially when so much of this stuff is neuroinflammation. So we want to make sure we're getting something that crosses the blood-brain barrier. Um, and then, focusing on mitochondria, especially if their energy levels
Mm-hmm.
are low. And then I'm also a big fan of all the medicinal mushrooms for shifting the immune system. So
Yeah.
those are kind of a lot of the key ones I use. I mean, I've kind of taken a deep dive into peptides,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm starting to use them a little bit more often. I used them on myself when I had Lyme, and I
Mm-hmm.
was a little scared to use them in patients just because I felt like I was just throwing everything at myself. So I'm definitely learned a lot more in trying to hit some of the things that are going on where I can't seem to shift the
Mm-hmm.
person, especially since I don't have access to ivermectin and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
the other things that really do make a big difference. So another big one for me that I've recently started to use is methylene blue, and I'm
Mm.
using that in kind of long COVID patients as well.
Are you finding with long COVID patients that using, the quercetin and histamine degraders is helpful, or is it more just helpful for symptoms versus like healing, if you will?
No, definitely. Yeah, I forgot about that. But
Yeah.
yeah, quercetin, zinc, like yeah, all of those things are really great at the allergy response and calming
Yeah.
things down, especially people that are still coughing and wheezing and
Hmm.
all of that, the respiratory symptoms for sure. In fact, I've started also in these long patients. I don't know if you use them at all, but some of the senolytics with using like the high doses of those things for like a couple of days.
Yeah.
Even yeah, there's been a lot of studies on that in long COVID because there previously a lot of studies in like COPD and
Hmm.
even pulmonary fibrosis, and I'm seeing that, believe it or not, some things that are mimicking or maybe even are the start of, fibrotic lesions in the lungs in some people. So definitely, like the senolytics are a little bit uh, intimidating, I guess, for all patients because,
Hmm.
if you have, we don't know who has cancer and who doesn't most times, right? Until it's very late in the process.
Hmm.
So if there is like an underlying cancer, you have to be a little bit careful because that could actually become a problem in those people. So
Yeah. Yeah, that can be a little overwhelming to
yeah.
both be the recommender of and the recipient of. Do you often recommend like IV therapies or, Myers cocktails or whatever have you for your long hauler patients? Do you feel like that helps hydrate them and kind of like whether it's just improve their day-to-day, quality of life, or is that kind of a nice to have?
Yeah, I mean, some of the things, yes, and then
Hmm.
some of the things, no. Like a lot of people ask about ozone, and I feel like
Hmm.
sometimes that can be too much of a pro-oxidant. So I'm a little leery, but when I have somebody that is interested in those kinds of things,
Hmm.
I kind of send them in the way of the people that are the experts on that because
Yeah.
I'm not. But HBOT therapy can be really, really helpful for some of the people with severe brain fog and
Hmm.
the neuroinflammation and tremors have become a big symptom now. And so those people can really benefit from the hyperbaric chamber. So
Yeah.
I do recommend that. And I do recommend some neurofeedback.
Mm.
I have a couple of people in the area that I kind of throw questions at them like, do you think
Yeah.
this thing that you do would be helpful? And then if so, they definitely will seek out that. But
Yeah. And what about like infrared saunas? Is that obviously
totally.
supportive for detoxing out everything? And I imagine so, but I know
Yeah,
there are
for
sometimes
sure.
not easy access for everyone, but
Right. Yeah, the infrared sauna and the photobiomodulation with the red light therapy is amazing.
yeah.
And that can be as simple as just sunlight, but
Hmm.
obviously this time of year where we live,
Yeah.
it's a lot harder to get that.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's amazing how much that can shift the immune system. There was an old study back from I don't even know years ago where one of the old like flus of whatever the one was like in 1918, I think, where they just pushed people's hospital beds outside in the sun and they actually got better. Like,
Yeah.
and so we know that that does so much.
Yeah. That's so
So
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. So talk to us about, let's start with it because I want to talk about some of kind of the more niched out things that greatly both impact how well you do with COVID and how well you're going to obviously heal from COVID. Like gut health, for example, obviously, you know, I talk about it a lot, but it's still not that talked about in terms of both the impact that COVID has on the gut as well as how do you see individuals that maybe were struggling with IBS or poor balances prior to getting infected and how well they're kind of recovering or suffering from long haulers.
Yeah. I mean, I guess just because of our training, everything goes back to the gut. So
Yeah.
there's not a patient that I see that we don't talk about gut health first.
Hmm.
And I think the fasting can help that.
Hmm.
I do use a lot of the spores as the
Hmm.
probiotic that I do just because that can lower LPS so much. And I've seen it happen where lowering that gets everything else back in balance. Recently only started using a little bit of the Akkermansia products that are out there. It's hard because testing is so difficult for
Yeah.
me. So
Yeah.
I'm just, trying to go off symptoms and do what
Mm-hmm.
works, which is why I kind of feel a little safer just doing the spores and seeing what
Mm-hmm.
happens. And then, if I can't make any headway there, then definitely try to get them to do some of the testing. But it's so hard here in New
I
York
know.
State. They make
We're
us
hearing
jump
a lot
through
of
the
New York needs to get it together. Yes. Well,
yeah,
all of
exactly.
healthcare needs to get it together and insurance across the board. That's a whole other
Yeah,
conversation though. Um,
yeah,
yeah, and it's so important. Like I had a good episode. So if anybody wants to hear more about the going in depth on the gut function in relation to immune function and and COVID health, I have one with Dr. Robert Silverman where we talk all about the impacts that COVID has on our gut function because it's not in your head that you're struggling all of a sudden with diarrhea or you're
yeah,
having what seems like IBS flare ups, or if you have Crohn's or colitis, something kind of flaring there because of what we were talking about with LPS and all the sort of inflammatory storm that comes with that. It increases our fungal overgrowth, it increases dysbiotic or bad good balance, if you will, in your gut. It really does cause quite a lot of issues, increases permeability. So we see all of these problems sort of start or get worsened when individuals get diagnosed with COVID. And it's definitely not all in your head. So there's research to back that and lots you can do to support it. Um, Another complaint, that I see a lot of patients coming in because they're coming to me for obviously much more like gut detox hormones. And they're saying, well, my hormones got really wonky when I either got the vaccine or I went through COVID. So, what are you seeing still there with the connections? Obviously, the gut is partially related to this, just so you know, but what are you seeing on your side with just obviously primarily working with COVID?
yeah. I mean, lots of menstrual irregularities, although a lot of that has sort of seemed to taper off a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. I think the further we get away from most people getting their last shot, I think we're doing a little bit better with that.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely it was crazy there for a
Mm-hmm.
while. And if you were one of those people that had that reaction, it just proves that this stuff does not stay in the arm, and it
Yeah.
in one of the places it loves to go is any of the organs. So ovaries, uterus,
Yeah.
adrenals are taking big hits. You know, uh,
Mm-hmm.
for men, the testes, like it's affecting everything. So let that spike protein get out and don't put any more in is and
Yeah.
try to avoid getting COVID again because it's just another dose of spike protein. Why we ever created something with the most toxic part of a virus and thought that would be a good idea, that it's just your body's going to become a factory to keep making more. I just don't
Mm-hmm.
understand whoever thought this was a great idea, but unfortunately we just have to figure out how to undo it now in people. And so anything you can do to detox from that spike going forward, because the hormones have taken a big hit, fertility has taken a big hit.
Mm-hmm.
The rate of miscarriages was out of control. Hopefully that's gonna kind of calm down. I'm not really sure though.
Yeah.
I don't think we even have the tip of the iceberg with the impacts going forward.
Yeah.
Whether you want to blame it on COVID, long COVID, vaccines, who knows? But it's what we're living with now. And I think the fertility piece is the scariest part for me.
Yeah. Yep. There's definitely a lot of, I think, unknown still too. And maybe it's more known than I know, but just especially with both vaccines or having COVID during pregnancy, especially early pregnancy in the first trimester. It's just so, I think just especially for obviously the mom to be, it's very anxiety inducing. And you're just like, I
Sure.
don't know, especially that knows or listens to these, types of podcasts or information out there. It's just like, how is this going to impact your pregnancy, your baby? You just have you really don't know, which is a little scary.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So talk to me. You mentioned vaccine injury. Can you explain what that is for anyone who isn't informed and sort of like we could do a whole episode probably on that, but what that is,
Yeah.
what people should be concerned about, looking for, talking to, seeking out a provider for.
Yeah, I mean, very similar to long COVID is, vaccine injury. And in fact, a lot of times they're interchangeable because it's sort of like a vicious circle of, you get COVID or you've been vaccinated and you have these symptoms that go on, but then they get better and then you get another round of COVID or another
Hmm.
shot and you're putting more spike protein in, so then you're getting more damage again and it's reactivating more virus again. And each time we get exposed to that spike protein, it's just triggering the whole cascade, sort of like any autoimmune flare. So it's just a nonstop vicious
Hmm.
circle. So yeah, I think that we just need to do our best to get
Hmm.
people to do like detox from spike as best they can. Even if you're not having symptoms now, I would suggest just doing some of those things because we know
Hmm.
that it's still in the body, just like when you have Lyme or Epstein-Barr or whatever, it's waiting to, rear its ugly head again. So we
Hmm.
just have to constantly be aware. And I think everybody could use detoxing a couple times a
Yeah.
year
Hmm.
for, in general. I mean, our environment is like a toxic soup. No matter where it's coming from, it's everywhere. So I
Yeah.
think just, and then, I also do genetics testing, and I see quite a few of my patients actually come back with having, some of the missing enzymes where they can't even
Hmm.
detox from certain things. Actually, I have one daughter and my husband both came back with that, and they're not related, by the way. So,
What is the enzyme you're specifically referring to for
you had to
anyone
ask
panicking and
that.
wanting to get anyone
Yeah.
panicking right now?
It has to do with the COMT gene, catechol
Hmm.
methyltransferase, but I think it's a different one. And the antidote is sulforaphane.
Yeah.
I can't remember which enzyme it is off the top
Yeah.
of my head, but you need to take sulforaphane if that's the case. And
Got Okay, I'm gonna just start my sulforaphane, guys. And broccoli
yeah,
sprouts either way can't harm me. Um,
yeah,
well, let me ask you some really random specific questions that might just be things I'm curious about, but I'm sure everyone listening is gonna have similar questions. So, one I just was thinking of because I used to hear Ben Lynch talk about it a lot, and obviously it does make sense, but I'm curious your take. So, if let's say I get COVID, right? I'm recently experiencing it, and I'm getting a fever because often we're obviously getting a fever with the infection. Are you in like how, at what extreme, I don't know how to really word this, of the fever, do you recommend somebody maybe using Tylenol or something to bring down the fever? Or are you like, let that baby ride so that you can burn off the infection? Like, how within
yeah.
reason do you educate people around that?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, I think like if you're 102 and less, let it burn. If
Yeah.
you start getting up there a little higher than that, you might do something to take the edge off. Yeah, that's a tough
I
question,
know.
and I
It's
don't
such a
know
like
if I
quality
have.
of life question.
Yeah,
And he was very like, even I don't remember the dose. I don't want to put words in this man's mouth, but it was like even
yeah,
higher than that, that he was like, it'll be fine until this. And I was
yeah,
like, man, that sounds, as somebody who feels really bad when they get those fevers, that sounds
yeah.
horrible. It's
Yeah,
like,
I know when I had Lyme, I had like 104 for 5 straight days. And
yeah,
yeah, you feel like you're gonna die. I mean, I didn't even know my name
yeah,
practically, so it
yeah,
didn't really matter. I think my husband thought I was
yeah,
gonna die though.
yeah.
Yeah,
He's like, take the medicine.
yeah,
Um, so big, you know, symptoms that people struggle with long term, just even kind of day to thinking quality of life again, is like lack of taste, lack of smell, brain fog. Do you have specific, whether it's supplements or tips that people can do to really specifically hit those? Like zinc was a big recommendation for a while. Is that still something you would
yeah,
suggest?
yeah. Zinc is definitely still a big one. The povidone iodine nasal rinses or
Mhm.
silver can be a good one. Honestly, a lot of the people still say like that olfactory training is what brings it back, but
Hmm.
it requires a lot of commitment, and a lot of people just give up because they get frustrated. Um, what else for that? Sometimes just replant, like, your whole nutrient panel is wiped out when you have any
Yeah.
viral infection. So just making sure you get all that stuff on board.
Hmm.
Sometimes B vitamins can shift it. Honestly, that's one of the hardest things. And the taste is really the smell, and it's
Yeah.
all due
Hmm.
to inflammation in the brain that's hitting the nerves. So, I typically try to do some lion's mane with those people. What are some other things? Zinc is definitely still a big one.
Yeah.
And, you got to make sure you're getting good products that are going to get to where they need to be too. That's,
Yeah.
people
That
are
is a
just
big problem.
randomly
Yeah.
going on Amazon and buying zinc, and who
Hmm.
knows what it
Hmm.
actually is.
Yeah.
So that's difficult as well.
This just was coming to me as we were talking about obviously loss of taste and smell. Are you big on using products like like clear spray, XLEAR, or some version of that especially during COVID, to keep kind of breaking up some
Definitely.
biofilm and all of that. So if anyone doesn't know, it's a saline, nasal spray that has xylitol in it as the basic one that can help with biofilm disruption and also obviously keep your sinuses relatively more clear. But I imagine I used it, when I've had COVID, and it does seem to help and kind of minimize what's going
Yeah.
on.
For
So,
sure. So that's something that people should always have on hand.
yep.
Even with the povidone iodine in it. I actually, early in COVID, I was I bought a bottle of povidone iodine, and I bought a ton of the X Clear stuff, and
Mhm.
I was just mixing it up for everybody I knew that got
Yeah.
COVID. I'm like, start using this, because if you can kill that virus while it's still in the nasal
Yep.
passages, which is most times where it enters, right? You can actually prevent it from going to the rest of the body, especially the lungs, and save yourself from even a risk of long COVID or
Yep.
whatever. And that's still been proven to be one of the best ways to keep things at bay. I
Hmm.
recommend 3 times a day to everybody
Yep.
that has COVID. And there's been some products that have come out that have the povidone in it, so I don't have to do that anymore. One of them is called Cofix RX,
Okay.
I think. Um, yeah, that's one. I also use, which I love, all of the Beekeepers Naturals
Mhm.
stuff, because it's safe for kids too. And they can use that nasal spray. They can use the throat spray.
Hmm.
um, I use some biocide and throat sprays.
Hmm.
If you can kill it in the throat and in the nose, a lot of times you can prevent anything from becoming any worse.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, those are definitely.
And those are so simple things you can get over the counter and just do that are going to be safe for almost everyone. So I love that recommendation. So with a couple other questions, there's obviously a big mental impact and emotional hit that takes place with individuals struggling with long COVID. I have plenty of patients that we're working through it, and it's just they're being overlooked by obviously so many of their allopathic
Yep.
practitioners. And are there recommendations or things you found helpful? Is just being heard and finding the right practitioner one of those big ones? Like, what do you recommend there? Or could you offer as maybe like a piece a peace offering for these people to have
Yeah,
just a little.
I think that's why I get so many patients. I mean, I'm getting people because I'm a practitioner for the FLCCC, and now more recently the Wellness Company, and people are finding me on those. And like, one lady called the other day, and she said like she found me on page 32 or something, because I'm not a prescriber, so they don't
Yeah.
have me listed, front and center.
Hmm.
And then I'm in New York, so that makes it even harder. But people are reaching out from all over the place. And like just having, that 15-minute conversation on the phone, like gives them so much peace of mind. Half the time,
Hmm.
I don't even do consultations with them. I just, throw them some
Yeah.
recommendations and tell them what to do from that aspect. Um, but there are definitely, like, FLCCC is a great resource for patients. They do weekly webinars. It's full of clinicians, but it's also full of just lay people that have stories to tell, or,
Hmm.
it's so much of what's going on during the webinar. It's so hard to focus if you have the chat on, because these people are like asking their questions in the chat and then
Mm-hmm.
clinicians are answering them, but at least it's like a resource that, I can get better from this, and there are things that I can do, and there's people that I can
Mm-hmm.
find. There's so that's FLCCC. Um, there's a group called React 19 that was formed, and I'm not exactly sure what they do, but I know they're like very supportive. I think they actually, find resources for vaccine injured,
Mm-hmm.
especially patients, and maybe just COVID injured as well. But yeah, there's a lot of groups that are starting to form. There's Facebook groups for
Mm-hmm.
long COVID. Just it's the same stuff as what Lyme patients have gone through for so many
Yeah.
years. And I mean, I guess now there is a code for long COVID that,
Yeah.
they can actually call it a disease now.
Oh,
So
that's
yeah, there is a code. I forgot what the letters are, but yeah,
yeah.
that's a thing. But and also, there's another whole population that sort of is forgotten about too. Like, I was working at Fallon's when COVID
Mm-hmm.
first happened, so we didn't miss a day. I was there
Yeah.
all the time. And, getting the people walking in the door, so fearful. But
Mm-hmm.
then you've got the divisiveness that happened with the fear, right? Those that wanted to wear masks and thought they did something, and those that refused to and disagreed. But then like there's almost like abuse that was happening
Mm-hmm.
between, vaccinated and unvaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even our politicians were getting on TV and saying, we hope that, your family doesn't try to go to a hospital if you're unvaccinated because you don't
Yeah.
deserve treatment. It's like, some of the things that were going on that probably still are. I mean, I had one guy that told me that I saved his life because he went to, I won't name the hospital, but he went to one of the local hospitals and he was told to come home, and he felt like he was discriminated against, and it sounded to me like he kind of was, but he was a
Mm-hmm.
transgender guy, and he was sent home, and I really don't know that he would have made it if I didn't like send him all the things I sent him.
Mm-hmm.
And he
Yeah.
wrote us a nice letter and everything saying that he believed that I saved his life. And people like that, if you weren't vaccinated and you had any other
Mm-hmm.
differences with you, I had couples that one would go to the hospital. I mean, this was at the time of when they were using some of the antibodies. And,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how they pick and choose who got to get them and who didn't,
Yeah.
right? But it was like some people were told, yeah,
Yeah.
we'll do it for you right now. Others said, no, we won't do it. And, you know, I don't know what the differences in the patients were. It wasn't
Yeah.
like, you're more at risk or you're more overweight or whatever. It was just seemed like it just happened to be who you saw that day when you walked in the hospital.
Yeah.
So, they definitely, people are struggling with all the emotional
Mm-hmm.
aspects of it. And I do think that the FLCCC, like that website, provides everything, protocols for prevention, protocols
Mm-hmm.
for treatment of long COVID, protocols for acute COVID, protocols for vaccine injury. And, if you can't follow along because you just don't know where to begin because there's a lot of information,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that's hard too when they list 25 supplements that could possibly help you. I think that's where I come in because it's
Yeah.
like people aren't going to be compliant, nor most people can't afford all that stuff.
Mm-mm.
So it's just let's get you some of the basics like you said,
Yeah.
treat the gut and replenish some of those nutrients that are
Mm-hmm.
wiped out. And 9 times out of 10, you can at least shift their health a little bit
Yep.
in a positive that they get a little hope back. And I think just getting some of that hope back is a great place. The mental aspect keeps people sick too.
Yeah.
So that's huge as well. So,
Yeah, it really just speaks to how much of a difference even just finding the right clinician for you or somebody that will actually hear you instead of just being passive about the entire thing. It can make a really big difference. I have this patient currently who has been working with some of the, big places like Hopkins, Mayo, and all of that, and has had all these tests and was like, I've been sick for years and not had one thing come back really abnormal. And we ran like everything from a Lyme panel, which came back positive, to micronutrient testing where everything's depleted. And I was like,
Yeah,
this is probably, whether COVID or Lyme or whatever was kind of the trigger, it's like all of your nutrients are in the trash, and that is going
yeah,
to make you feel the way you feel all day, every day. And like, if we can even just support, like you were saying, certain nutrients and getting them to a better level, you might get a little hope. And just being able to actually see how much they responded to being heard, having new tests, that it
exactly.
was like a whole, not attitude shift, but just like, I finally found someone, you know what I mean, that's going to
Yeah.
listen and do things. And it's really can be powerful. So I really do encourage you guys, if you have been struggling or think that's something that you're struggling with, reach out to Pam. I'm going to put her contact information. And Pam, why don't you tell people where they can find you too, or reach out to you?
Yeah, I do have a website. It's not, it doesn't have much, but it'll get you to be able to send me an email.
Get you to you.
Yeah, it's pampestowellness.com. And then I also have I'm IFM, find a practitioner through the
Yep.
Institute for Functional
Hmm.
Medicine, like Katie. So that's a resource. And then the FLCCC website, and that's the same thing. They have a practitioner, find a practitioner site. And then through the wellness company, that one's a little newer for me, and they've had some challenges. I'm not going to lie, like with with being able to help as many people. Dr. McCullough is the big
Hmm.
spokesperson for them, and I think they just grew so fast
Yeah.
that they're
Yep.
having trouble keeping up with the demand. They also have a line of supplements, but if that's something that you want to just do on your own, that would be fine. If
Hmm.
you wanted to seek me out, I might have some alternatives to some of their products that I believe are also very good and maybe even a little bit better and a little bit less expensive. Yeah, there's so much you can do. You just have to identify that that's what the problem is.
Hmm.
So yeah. So those are the places that you can reach me at.
Perfect. Well, I think this is hopefully giving, even if this episode gives one person hope and kind of that support and being able to find obviously a literate practitioner, that we've done our job. So I thank you so much for coming on today and being a wealth of knowledge and really doing such great things in a field that is so unexplored at this point, and just kind of being that place for people.
Thanks so much, Katie. Same goes to you too with all the people you're helping.
Thank you.